Hi, happy Hanukkah. Tonight is the first night of Hanukkah, and my son was just here to make sure that I don't mess up the video technology. Not that there's a proof of that. Anyway, I want to say a few words. I want to have some fun, and that would be playing around in Hanukkah as a sort of wrecking ground for competing historical sources. And I'm just going to pick one story. So this will be like a very, very tiny seminar. And I think you know from before that Hanukkah is a question of where to get the sources from. I've spoken about that in the past, and I assume you know what I'm talking about if you've heard any of this before. Basically, we're looking at the fact that the Gemara doesn't really talk about the Maccabean Revolt, hardly. It only talks about the miracle of the oil, unless you look at the Megillat Taanit in certain places, and for the purposes of halacha, meaning what's a Taanit day, in the Little Mitzvah and Lasanas Bahon, so then they might mention some historical detail, which wouldn't make any sense to anybody unless you compare and contrast it, or you collate it better with the apocryphal books of the Maccabees, First Maccabees and Second Maccabees. I don't want to chazer over everything. I've already said it before a number of times, and you can go back to the old podcast from last year and 2 years before Hanukkah time. I'm sure I always talk about this sort of thing. I just want to give you an example, a Beispiel, today of how there's a story out there, or maybe two sets of stories, and they appear in different places in different ways. They're somewhat the same, somewhat not the same. And welcome to the world of historical research when you get to the what you call classical period of Judaism, or ancient Judaism, rather, I should say, which is the Second Temple period, in which we have the Greek and Roman stuff, and then you have a little bit of Chazal, and then you have like a Josephus, and this one and that one, and the various Greek and Latin authors. It's a mishmash. So, without any further ado, I'm going to get right into it. But I do want to say that this is tonight's talk is being sponsored by Shua Beer. Thank you very much. I ran into him the other day, and he very kindly volunteered to sponsor this first one during the holiday of Hanukkah. I hope others will come forth and follow in his footsteps. I'm going to talk today just about the famous story that you heard, or you think you heard, about how the Maccabean Revolt began. Okay, we know that the Jews were okay, and then all of a sudden, the Hellenists, the Greeks, whatever, started persecuting them. And this eventually triggered a war. Now, how did that exactly happen? So there are like 3 or 4 competing versions of how it happened. And welcome to, as they say, historical research in Bayesheni period. This first version I would throw at you is one most of us heard since we're children. And that is from the first book of Maccabees. I'll read the story very quickly. You've heard it before, I imagine. Maybe not inside, but you heard basically the story. It's only 2 paragraphs. And according to this, Matisyo happened to be living in Modi'in. Originally, apparently, he was from Yerushalayim if he was a Kohen, but then they ran away in times of persecution in Modi'in. And then the Greeks caught up and came to the town of Modi'in to try to get him to worship an idol. So it goes like this. Then the king saw, so I'm reading from the first book of Maccabees, the most Jewish edition of it, which is from Dropsy College, 1950. As you can see over here, Maccabees is in Greek, not in Hebrew. The original is in Hebrew. If you know how to understand the discourse and speech patterns of the Greek over here, you can see it's really taken from Hebrew. And as I read this, you'll recognize that it's a Hebrew original. There's a second book of Maccabees, which tells different stories, not negated to this one. And anyway, without any further ado, here we go. So the first book of Maccabees says, then the king's officers, known as of Antiochus, who were compelling the people to renounce God. So these are people going around making people violate the Torah and so forth, came to the town of Modi'in to force them to sacrifice. Notice, to do a carbon for Avodah Zarah. Many Israelites came forth to them, even Matisyo and his sons were there. The officers of the king said to Matthias, you are a leader, a prominent and great man in this town. You are firmly supported with sons and brothers. So you have a big mishpacha. Come forward first and carry out the order of the king, as all the heathen and the men of Judah and those left in Jerusalem have done. So go and offer a carbon for Avodah Zarah. then you and your sons will be counted among the friends of the king. That's an official title in the Seleucid Empire, friends of the king. You and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many gifts. Mattathias answered and replied in a loud voice, though all the heathen within the bounds of the royal domain obey the king, and though each one forsake the worship of his fathers and show preference for the king's commands, yet will I, my sons and my brothers, walk in the covenant of our fathers, Brit Davos. Far be it for us to forsake the law and the testaments, the Torah mitzvahs. We will not listen to the decree of the king by going astray from our worship either to the right or to the left, which you can recognize, lo saser yamina small. When he stopped speaking these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of all to sacrifice upon the altar in Modi'in in accordance with the decree of the king. This guy was obviously a Hellenist. When Mattathias saw him, this Jew about to do a carbon for Avodah Zarah Bifar Hesia, he was filled with zeal and his soul was stirred up. He brought courage to decision, and running up, he slew him upon the altar. Then the king's man, who was enforcing this sacrifice, Mattathias also killed at the same opportune time and pulled down the altar. Now it doesn't say what he did with the other Greek officers, but whatever. Thus he showed his zeal for the law, for the Torah, as Pinchas had done to Zimri ben Salu. That's what it says. Then Mattathias shouted in a loud voice in the town, saying, let everyone who is zealous for the law and would maintain the covenant follow me. He and his sons fled to the mountains and left whatever they possessed in the town. That's, I think, the version most of us heard, certainly I in my generation, growing up, because that's what it says in the Bible, or at least in the Apocrypha, which is a guy considered the Bible. And the first book of Maccabees is a straightforward kind of story. It's not so much into nisim and miracles, and notoriously, it doesn't talk about the miracle of the oil. It's more of a military type of thing. And this is how it happened. There are many similar cases in history where the invading power pushed things a little bit too far, and it led to blowback. That's what happened over here. That is story number 1. In Chazal, this story you do not find in the Gemara or anything like that. However, if you look in the Megillat Taanit, which is the list of days, which is pre-Talmud, it's from the time of the Mishnah, more or less, and a little earlier actually. And the Megillat Taanit has a list of days. You'll remember that you're not supposed to fast or have a haspid in, a little misput, and a little sanisbone, and there's a whole bunch of different dates. And as you can see over here, and I'm using the Megillat Taanit, I have different editions, but the one you can find, anybody can find, in this picture, Mishnayos, right? So you look on 17 Elul, over here, 17 days in Elul, Shivasar Bay. So as you can see, if you look closely, there's bold print and smaller print. And the bold print is supposed to be the first layer of Megillat Taanit, and the smaller print is a later addition to Megillat Taanit. But the Chazal hold of all of them. And it says like this: B'Shivasar Bay is Natil Ramay MeYehudai. And what do you call it? On the 17th of Elul, the Romans left Judah and Jerusalem. But meanwhile, when you get to the smaller print, it actually is talking about the Greeks. You will perhaps remember this from the Gemara, that the Romans used to bother the people in Jerusalem, and they couldn't go in and out except they had to sneak out at night. So how did the Greek kings, you see the interplay, there's a lot of Girsa problems. Having said that, here are the text. How did the Greek kings persecute the Jews? They would set up military camps, Greek military camps, in all the ayars, in the cities and towns, so that they could force themselves on the kalas to have the right of the first night, as they call it. Notice that tiboil lehegman tchila, that the Greek officer should bia with the kala before her husband does. That's a way of really rubbing your nose and reducing the Jews to shame. So again, lios ma'anin es hakalas v'yakachoy nos listen, Balaam, the first Takala, who's a Basula, has to be with the Greek officer, and only then is she allowed to marry her husband. And there were Monet, they prevented Klal Yisrael from having a happy wedding, obviously. That it says, Taka in the Tochacha, Isha Tares, Vishacher Yishkamena. Those are the words. And people didn't want to get married, right? Because it's such a terrible situation. You will, of course, remember this is the beginning of Ksubis, isn't it? Right? You know that it's in the beginning of Ksubis. So then what happened was they held secret weddings, so nobody should know about it. The Greeks shouldn't show up. I will reduce from them kol sasan v'kol simcha, which means that there will be a chasa and kala, but there won't be a kol. Okay, fine. Now, here's the point. Ubas achas hoisel Matisyo beyochon kon gadol, and Matisyo, our hero, had a daughter, and you know, I assume, that if it's Eishes Yisrael, so it's a question of rape, she can still, Al Pi Din, she can marry the husband. It's not her fault. But if it's Eishes Cohen, then she can't. So anytime a Cohen would get married, he couldn't marry her. Because if she had been with the Greek, even though it was forced on her, to become Pasal the Cohen. So here you have Bas Matisyo, Kshagiz Manali Nase, and came her Chasana, Boha Kastra Latama. So the Greek guy showed up to be matami her. The Kinu Matisyo Bonov, and Matisyo and his sons became Kanoim. The Gavr Yonam Malchus Yavan, and they defeated Gavr Yonam Malchus Yavan. That's a really wide phrase. V'nim Subiyadam Hargam, right? And they were given in their hands and they killed him. That's clearly a corruption of what they're trying to say is that they killed the Greek guys that were coming to be matami her. Doesn't mean at that occasion they conquered the whole Greek Empire, which is what it says. It means that's the beginning of the revolt, which eventually led over many, many years and a lot of sacrifices to the Maccabean military victory. So the day that they were mavatlet, knows that day that happened, this event happened on 17 Elul, according to this, and therefore it's a national celebration, Megillat Taanit Day. That, my friends, is a very different story. And may I say, there's a famous medrash. It's not really a medrash, but it's one of those midrashim they can find in Eisenstein's Otzer Midrashim. I just don't have it. I don't know where it's in. I have it in one of my books somewhere. I have a lot of books in the other room. Where I think it's called Medrash Matisyo or something like that, where the daughter, meaning this one over here, who there is named Chana. Isn't that funny? Chana and the 7 sons, it's a different person. Where the daughter rebukes her father and brother to say, "You're going to let them do this to me? You know? What kind of men are you?" And spurred on by her taunts, they went and killed the Greeks. Something like that. So we have 2 versions now in the story. One is what I just read in the book of Maccabees. The other one's in the Chazal. You're going to ask me the question, so how can we all learn the story from the book of Maccabees, which is only in the Apocrypha? Why did they do it in the Chazal, which is a Chazal? The best answer I can come up with is, these are stories are usually taught to young children. You ain't going to go into, Nichnaso Tibol Hegman Tchila. You're not going to get into such sort of X-rated stuff. Not with a young crowd. Consequently, the other story is the one that circulated. Sorry. Now comes the third set of sources, which are going to play on the book of Maccabees in one way or another. I hold in my hand 2 separate books, A and B. This, as you can see, in my left hand is Josephus, in English, translated in other words from the Greek. And here's Yosippon, which is in Hebrew. Now, Yosippon purports to be Josephus in Hebrew. It is not. First of all, it's written hundreds of years later. And second of all, the text is different. Okay? There are some similarities and overlaps. There's also a lot of non-overlaps. And there's no question anybody who ever reads Yosippon, that's like a highly art-scrolled, version of the events told from a very fluent point of view of the Jewish history of that time. So it purports to be Josephus. Matter of fact, I picked this up years ago in Yerushalayim, and you'll see, and in Mei Sharm, in a bookstore there, or right next to Mei Sharm, and you'll see, they'll say, this is the real thing. In other words, Yosippon is the correct one, and this is baloney, which is not true, but that's what they say. The reason they say it is because there were Rishonim, a fair number, who are familiar with this, but not with the Greek one, but not with the other one, and Hayitochen, that a Rishon should use a source that turns out to be spurious. It's Hayitochen, but not to them, and consequently, Yosippon enjoys a very interesting history in Jewish people. If you look at the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, you will see that he says, on Hilchos Chanukah, you light the candles, you do an Eretz Halolo, and then the father sits down and reads Yosippon to the family. And that's because whatever the historicity of it, let's leave that aside for a second, is a golden oldie classic of Yiddishkeit. Your great-great-great-grandparents and their great-great-grandparents and their great-great-parents all had Yosippon, if they were at all literary, if they all had any books. And all the Rosh Hashivas had it. And this is where they got the history from, usually. Okay? Yosippon is written in a very easy Hebrew, may I say. And my edition, of course, is nice as in the Kudos and all the rest of that. That's why I bought it in Jerusalem. And you can see, in a very interesting way, I would argue, that the author definitely knows Josephus, but he fills it in to make the story better. So either you say Josephus left stuff out and all this sort of thing, or you say that our author sees like little gaps here and there, as often happen in historical recounting, since nobody knows everything, and he endeavors to fill it in his way. So what I mean to say is, as you'll see in a second, the main character in the early revolt is Philip. Okay? Now, who the heck is Philip? I've heard about Antiochus. Well, it turns out, if you look at the book of Maccabees, you'll see, let's see over here, that, where is it? A guy named Philip came and attacked the ones that were in the cave. Right? Where is it over here? A guy named Philip. Let me pause this for a second. Okay, here we are. Let me fix this here. A second. Okay, so later in the book of Maccabees, it says, when King Antiochus dies of an illness, a bad accident later on, so as he was dying, Antiochus, the wicked, it says he called Philip, one of his friends, and put him in charge of the whole kingdom. He gave him the crown, the robe, the signet ring, with the authority to bring up Antiochus IV's son, Antiochus V, and to rear him to become king. Okay? So notice, you see there was this guy, Philip, who's described as being one of the king's friends. In the Yosippon, they weave it together that Philippus, or Philip, is the guy who enforces all the gezerus against the Jews in terms of trying to stamp out the Jewish religion. So the way Yosippon has it is a chapter 20 where it says, Yusupar Bosipar Philippus Sartsav Antiochus. That will tell you the story of Philip, the general Antiochus, and the wars that he conducted between Antiochus and the Maccabees. Now, here you have to listen about 4 or 5 or 6 paragraphs, and you'll see where I'm going, the way Yosippon tells the story, which I doubt is how you ever heard it. It's after these things, that they just finished telling you the story of Chan and the 7 sons, how they tortured them to death because they wouldn't bow down to the idol. Yosippon is the only place where it says that woman's name was Chana and the 7 sons. it says that. And after that, Antiochus took off and was away, because in the book of Maccabees, he's also described as actually not being present in Judea at the time of the Maccabean revolt. To go to Macedon on his way, which really means to Syria. But on the way out, Antiochus orders Philip and his other generals, Macho Timcha, like Amol, wipe out any Zecher Yehuda, any remembering of the Jews and Judaism in Israel. Whoever calls himself a Jew, kill him. Whoever agrees to call himself a Greek, let him live. But I'm reading you what Yosippon says. Vayasu came Philippus Hashem Imo, and so Philip and the generals did it. Vayashchisu kol asher motzim Yam Yisrael, and they did hashchasa, destruction, on Am Yisrael. Vayimachas Hashem motzeh shomer torah, and he wiped out, he erased anyone who was a shomer Torah. Raka shebrachim matisyo b'yochim haram redois. Nimotimo. Only the ones who ran away with Matisyo to Har Modian, they're the only ones who escaped. This is a different story. He couldn't stand this Cherpes Hagoyim, and he'd have to say that he's a Greek and all that. And he made up his mind to run away. This is taken from Yaakov and Lavan, to run away from the Greeks and not have to deal with it. And when he saw the tsaras of Klal Yisrael, he was a kanoi for Hashem. And he said, now here is a paraphrase of what it says in a poem in the book of Maccabees. Woe is my mother gave birth to me, that I should live to see the Shever Ami, destruction of my people. And I'm not like the tzaddik, which is Sheva Yipol Tzaddik B'Kom, but I've fallen, I can't rise again. It's expression. And this Matisyo, when he ran away to the mountains, this is before any incident. He already sent his son, Yehuda, the famous Judah Maccabee, secretly to other towns and cities, saying, Mi b'chem yirei Hashem. Who there is Yirei Hashem? Umi Hashem Elai. It's not, okay? Not the way it says in the other book. As a result, Judah Maccabee went around secretly recruiting people for his army, for its cause, and the Hasidim joined him, meaning the Frum. And all these Hasidim came to Matisyo in the mountains. Enough with the Dvarim and Aces, no, is figuring out how to hide and secretly practice Judaism. The only thing left is for us to daven to Hashem, to save whatever is left over, and to fight. Let's undertake the war, and let's go down fighting like men. Very un-Jewish way of talking. Right? Let's go fighting like men. Let's not die like sheep led to the slaughter. Sounds a little bit like the words I get it, And they're all mischazik from this. Where's your God, O Judah? Meaning, rise and fight, Klal Yisrael. Because the ruler is this guy, Macedonian Antiochus. Enough of this tsaris. Sharpen your sword, people of Judah, or maybe with Judah Maccabee, and figure out how to save yourselves from this Macedonian goyim, and cast off like it says by Esau, cast off the yoke, and from that day on, nifrak all goyim moktam al Yehuda. The yoke was busted. So he's making the assertion here. This is not like the book of Maccabees, in which a long war with ups and downs went on for decades. And all the Maccabee brothers were killed in battle one time or another. It wasn't a davar bash at all. Here he says, from the day they decided that they're not going to be under the Yavan, that's the Parakta Uro B'Tzavarecha.
At least mentally, they no longer felt subservient. As you will see from the niflos of the Rebbeinu Shalom. When Philip and the generals heard that there's a revolt brewing, and the Prisim, meaning the Hellenists, the priestestic people, the Hellenists informed them saying, that Matisyahu and his sons organizing a conspiracy, a kesher, against Greece. And Matisyahu and his sons are seducing the people of Yehuda to fight. And they're getting stark. So the Greeks traveled from their base. And they wanted to attack the Maccabean base in the mountains, which is supposed to be Modi'in. And the Greeks brought a large army, Chayil Kavid Mod. And as they were marching, now this is not in the Maccabee book. They found 1,000 frummies hiding in a cave trying to keep Shabbos. And they came to the cave and they said, come out be Mechal Shabbos and your Libby won't die. And the from Jews on the inside said, Lo Neitzei v'lo Nechalos HaShabbos. Ki Eidim Olinu Hayom Shemai B'aretz Kasher Kibalnu Misinai L'Kayim Mitzvahs Torasenu B'im Yesh Nachem L'Hamisenu Hamisunun. We ain't doing nothing. You want to kill us, kill us. Ki Lo Asam Mitzvahs Malchem, because we're not going to listen to this command. Vayitzav Holipos Vayikru Seitzim Ahar. So he ordered that wood be brought by Yavim Al Piyam Marvei in Meish, and they put wood at the entrance of the cave, and they lit it up so that the smoke will kill everybody on the inside. And made like a gas chamber, the smoke choked everybody on the inside of the cave. Now this is supposed to be when the revolt has already begun, and there's a Maccabean base, a rebel base in the mountains, and the Greeks are on the way, and just as a matter of bad luck, they ran across these frummies trying to keep Shabbos, hiding away from everybody. In the book of Maccabees, this is told with a slightly different twist, where it says, let me see here, it says that men who sought justice and judgment went down to the wilderness to settle there with their wives, their sons, and their cattle, because misfortunes had fallen hard upon them. That means the wilderness of Yehuda. You know what that means? That's south of Jerusalem, between Jerusalem and, let's say, Masada, Jerusalem, the Dead Sea. So very few people living there. It's a wilderness. And they figured they'll wait out the Greek persecutions over there. This is not the way it's described in what I just read you, which is this was a cave in the area of Modi'in, which is not in the Midbar Yehuda, as you know. And they encountered them on the way to marching against the Maccabees. And then you have, it says, the news reached the king's officers and the forces in Jerusalem that men who rejected the command of the king went down to the hiding place in the wilderness. Many pursued them, overtook them, encamped against them, and organized an attack on the Sabbath day. They said, enough, come on out and obey the command of the king and you will live. But the Jews on the inside said, we will not come forth, nor will we obey the command of the king to violate the Sabbath day, profane the Sabbath day. So the Greeks attacked them. They did not defend themselves or hurl a stone against them, nor block up the hiding places, saying that let us all die in our innocence. May heaven and earth testify in our behalf that you are destroying us against all justice. They attacked them on the Sabbath, and they, their wives, and their children, and their cattle died to the number of 1,000 souls. So it doesn't say they smoked them out or anything like that, right? But so they went inside and killed them because they managed wouldn't fight back. They held, since it's Shabbos, you can't fight. I mean, you can't pick up muktzah and things like that. I bekuch nefesh. This is obviously, obviously, this is their way of interpreting Yeharg Val Yavar. Yehareg V'al Yavar. You let yourself get killed rather than do the Avera. Right? Therefore, when they got attacked on Shabbos, for the purpose of making Michal Shabbos, it's a Shas Eshmad, it's Yehareg V'al Yavar. So the Greeks went in the cave and stabbed everybody and they didn't fight back because the elder not allowed to fight back. In the other book, it says they smoked them out. They put smoke, made a big fire at the entrance of the cave, and that killed everybody inside by asphyxiation, that sort of thing. And indeed, it says over here, which I don't think it says in the other book, when Matisyahu heard this, I'm talking about the book of Maccabees now, they mourned greatly, saying, if all of us do as our brothers have done, and do not fight against the heathen for our lives and our laws, they will soon destroy us off the face of the earth. They then made the following decision, the Maccabees. If any man attacks us in battle on the Sabbath day, let us oppose him, that we may not all die as our brothers did in the hiding places. So, in other words, this is the famous thing the Gemara talks about. Got to collate all this together, you see? Where it says, Mutob l'chalo Shabbos achas kadei shetishmu Shabbos harbe. Right? If I leave one Shabbos for the purpose of keeping Shabbos. The lomdus I leave to, I'm serious, that's interesting by itself, but I'm not going to get into that now. Your local Orthodox rabbi can explain the alumnus behind it. I mean that. Now, so the story is slightly different. So then the story continues that Philip and the soldiers marched forward to the Maccabean base in Modi'in, Har HaModa'it, and they saw that the Jews were ready for them. They were all armed. Chagar Klei Krab. They were, had their swords and everything on them. Right? And you saw Echo Banamimo, that Matisyahu had his own brothers and sons with him. So it wasn't only Matisyahu, it was his mishpacha plus the 5 sons. And in addition, Mesei Ma'at Me'adas Yisrael Chassidim, plus a few Chassidim who had joined the cause. Ki holchu shar achem lahavis neshem batamim hamadois. What happened to all the Frumis that came and joined? It said before, when Judah Maccabee ran around and recruited so many Chassidim, as he calls it, he says they had gone back to their towns to bring their families to the rebel stronghold in the mountains. So they weren't there that day. Right? Ki holchu sharachim lahavis neshem bestapam bahar mados l'ischazik sham l'sazim melchama. So the Greeks came there quick before they were ready. By Kadmus Matisyahu Koina Palkita Philippus, Besori Melch Antiochus, Dibri Shalom Lemar. And so Philip and his generals started trying to seduce with words Matisyahu, saying, Shmana Matisyahu Koin, Ato ish nichwa be'amcha, say Mrs. Antiochus, you're a chashav guy, do what the king commands. Betichya v'lo tamus, you won't die. Vayam Matisyahu b'gvali v'yomer. Matisyahu said, Begova Leiv, with great arrogance, pride. Ani es mitzvahs malki ani Yosef. Vatem Mrs. Malkachem. Kasher tzivaschem. I have my king, you have your king, you follow the rules, you Philip, follow the rules of your king, I'm going to follow the rules of my king, which is the Rebbeinu Shalom. See what I mean? You don't see any of this in the book of Maccabees, but it's a heck of a story. And I don't know, this might be the actual story. Get it? You never know. When the officers heard this, they all were in this bahel, trembling. And answer, they were thinking already how to make a trap and capture the fortress. And how to kill him the way they had killed all those Chassidim in the cave. Right? What a stratagem. So this is the matzah. In that context, with the Maccabean forces, small as they are on the top of that mountain, and the Greeks, much larger, better equipped, at the bottom, trying to think of how to attack best, one of the Hellenistic Jews who was with the Greeks, accompanied them, said, Tamei ani mod misar melch mechilo ad masei tachrish l'matizyo lo tas nekambo. He says, I'm angry at you. Why are you letting this guy Matisyahu shoot his mouth off? Why don't you take the cover from him? So there's a lot you could say on this. I don't want to take up too much time. But, this supports the theory that primarily this was a war between two sets of Jews, and the king's officers and soldiers were backing the non-from Jews in their war against the from Jews. Therefore, he's rebuking the Greek officers. You're insufficiently zealous to destroy the Maccabees. I'm shocked. He has the chutzpah to publicly disobey the king. And when this Hellenist Jew was saying this, full of rage at the from Jews, at Matisyo, this Hellenist Jew, Yishla was Charbo, pulled out a sword, Vayitos Rosh Chazrecha, and immediately beheaded a pig that was accompanying the army, the Chazera, and to show his contempt for Matisyo and the from Jews at the top of the mountain. So he proceeded to offer up this pig as a carbon or some kind of a makeshift mizbeach, treating it with all the halachas that apply to a Jewish carbon, thereby demonstrating his contempt for the whole business. He took this dead pig and he brought it to this mizbeach that they built for the king. And he took the head of a pig. So this is quite a scene, right? He took the head of a pig and he put it in his mizbeach. And he offered up, he was makater it to the Greek gods of Antiochus. And he offered it up in a fire and he burned it like you would do a carbon in mockery of the way he did the carbon in the Beis Hamikdash. So I'm trying to say this. This is like, Bol Na Marosa on Yom Kippur. I mean, like, how can I show sufficiently my opposition, my contempt to traditional Judaism? Matisyo itself in Mahabara, and Matisyo was standing up there and watching, full of rage. And he saw what this Hellenist did, this Jew. He was filled with a sense of being a kanoi. And Matisyo pulled out his own sword and jumped down the mountain real fast and jumped on the Mizbeach. And he basically hit the guy on his neck and beheaded him at one swoop like that his head shot up like in a movie, right? He hit it so hard that the head went flying, as we would say. And really like a movie. And the head went flying and landed at the feet of Philip. So, I mean, that's a good scene, okay? And the headless corpse fell on the altar together with the chazer. Right? And so the fire, which was already raging, consumed the head of the chazer and the goof of this Hellenist. And what about the general? He chopped him in half. Right? In other words, not only the Hellenist, but also the Greek officer. He chopped him in half. And the other generals ran away. And there were many of the Greek soldiers there that he killed, Mapil. And he blew on the shofar. It was a sign that the other people of Am Yehuda, the Jewish people, should come and join him. Who Matisyo HaKohen HaGadol Asher Her Miyad Chil B'Malchus Yovan. He's the famous Matisyo that raised this thing from the banner of revolt against Malchus Yovan. For who Asher Tzivi Yisrael Elochem B'Shabbos, and he's the guy that gave the heter, as we saw before, to fight on Shabbos. Now it doesn't say in the story over here. You see, there's disjunctures in all these narratives. The other one tells you that they came upon them on the Sabbath, and in the desert. Here it says they came upon them on the way, And what do you call it? They how does it put over here? Did he say here that it was on Shabbos? Yeah. So this whole thing was happening on Shabbos. Let's put it this way. If they found and killed everybody in the cave and then they came there, it sounds like the whole thing happened on a Saturday. And obviously Matisyahu chopped off the guy's head and all the rest of it on a Saturday. And so obviously, from this story, you see that he gave a heter to fight on Shabbos in a self-defense war. Who asher tzivus Yisrael yilochem b'Shabbos, who yamad lo nemelitz. And this Matisyahu, says Yosippon, the pious book, which was the beloved golden oldie. He is the Melitz Yosha for us. Who asher amad lo shim ekoim makim yamahim. Because I'll say b'shlishi, Sefer Yosippon Memes, Hanukkah, Sefer Yosippon Ben Gurion HaKohen. And we write about him elsewhere in this place. And they go on to tell. Now, what's my point? So we have the book. It's all trying to account how did the war start. You have the book of Maccabees, which tells it in its rather austere and chaste way. The Greeks came there, they offered this, Matisyahu said no, and so forth. He did kill the Hellenists, he did kill the Greeks also. Then he fled to the mountains. You have the story about Tibol, the Hegman Tchila, which is a completely different story. And then you have this Yosippon thing, which clearly knows the Maisa about Matisyahu, but has it in a different spin that, he was already, the revolt had started earlier. He was in a mountain fortress. The Greeks came there. They offered him to come down. He wouldn't come down and worship their idols. The Hellenist Jew didn't say, I'll offer a carbon. I mean, he took a chazer and he talked up the head of the chazer and he offered him on a mizbeach. That's like a carbanola, and that really ticked him off. Matisyahu then chops off the guy's head and burns his goof on that altar with the dead pig, with the head of the pig. Like, what a way to go. And then he kills, the main officer, who is described earlier, by the way, anachronistically, but he's described earlier in the book of Yosippon as the officer of Ptolemy II. Now it's anachronistic, but nevertheless, who supervised the translation of the Targum Sheba. Interesting. And therefore he had respect for the Jews at one point, but when he signed up to work for Antiochus, he went in a different direction. So that's just one little example of what happens when you play around with the different sources and how they're in the same ballpark, but it's not exactly the same story. And there are all these variations. You see that everybody had, generally speaking, the Maisa, but each one puts a twist on it. And you can't tell, which one isn't a twist because the imagination of the author took off or the opposite. And it's what makes the historical study of the sources on Hanukkah, meaning the Maccabean Revolt, either frustrating or, if you like historical research, it's actually fascinating. So here I just gave you a whole bunch of material just at the very beginning of the story of the Maccabean Revolt, which of course you and I know took a long time, but in the end resulted in the Jews regaining the Beis Hamikdash and the story of Chanukah. That's all for now. And as I say, I don't think most people are familiar with this. Maybe as a result of what I just read you may be inspired to go to a bookstore and get the Yosippon or something like that, because the Hebrew is very cool. And I'll tell you again, it doesn't matter whether it's all accurate 100% or not. Generations of Klal Yisrael were raised on this stuff. I'm very serious. And matter of fact, the founders of modern Israel, Ben Gurion and all the guys say, they grew up, on stories like this, inspired them for Jewish heroism. It's a very frum sefer, but it's always about, the heroism. Later he talks about the Korban Beis Hamikdash. He's got all this stuff in there, but it's always done in a very vivid and powerful way. Can you imagine sitting around, let's say, for example, in Eastern Europe in a cold winter night when it's snow outside and they lit the menorah and then, now they're sitting down and the father's reading the stories of Matisyahu and the children are fascinated. You understand? It's fascinating. Anyway, that's a little bit of the Jewish past. Again, I want to thank Shua Beer for kindly sponsoring this, and we'll see if we have any other sponsors for other things on Hanukkah. With that, I wish you all
a Chanukah Sameach.